Hello, welcome to Jason the Old Millennial. My name is Jason. Speaking to you here in my bedroom in the great state of Kansas. And today is a big day in U.S. It is the 250th anniversary of our country coming together July 4th of 1776, declaring our independence from England, who owned the 13 colonies at that time, anyways. And so, a very important day for us Americans, where we love to blow things up, basically, with fireworks and all that. And very patriotic day. It's cool now being able to be alive to see the 250th year. So, a pretty cool moment here. I've heard about 200th anniversary from my parents back when they were younger, and now I get to experience the 250th anniversary. And so, of course, I'm got some more patriotic clothing today for the occasion. So I wanted to do a video. I thought, we're never going to have another 250th anniversary. It's the only time. So it should be a good idea as an American to do some kind of video commemorating the day in history. And yeah, of course, I'm proud American, love America, love the country. Yeah, to me, it's the greatest country in the world. Of course, I'm biased because I'm American and all that. But the best way I thought of talking about it is talking about one of my favorite subject matters, actually, that I love talking about, and that is presidents. I'm a huge president nerd, I guess, a presidential history nerd. I have a bunch of books on different presidents and also just, in general presidential stuff. And I've been to a handful of presidential homes and museums and libraries and all that. Anyways, I love reading about presidents and talking about them and all that. So I thought I would talk about my 10 favorite presidents to basically to study, and I think are 10 most interesting presidents, some of the 10 most interesting presidents we ever had in our 250 years as a country. Overall, there's been 45 presidents. Even though Trump is number 47 at the moment, we've had two, him and Grover Cleveland, have been president on two different occasions. So they are counted twice in there. So basically, there's 45 men in 250 years has been president of the United States. Anyway, so I thought I'd talk about, I think are the 10 most interesting presidents to talk about. And I'm using that because it's hard to say what are the 10 best. It's hard because how do you compare a president from way back then to now? So many different circumstances, so many changes throughout history. And it's so hard since I wasn't alive during most of the history, and I've been alive during 43 years of America's history. So I can't talk too much about what's happened in the past from just what I've read and heard and all that. But I want to talk about these 10 individuals mostly because I find them fascinating, their history or their individuals themselves, not just when they were president, because there's a lot of different lists. You can make lists of who were the 10 greatest presidents when they were president, But I like to talk about other things that they did before and after president. I think makes some of these individuals even more interesting to read about. So like that, I guess. And I guess these would be recommendations to anybody to do more readings. I think these are interesting individuals. And I just love the whole idea of like, how does someone get to the biggest, most powerful position in the United States and in the world? How do you get there? I think it's very fascinating. And of course, I have to say, I'm obviously very biased. Anybody who's going to make a list like this is going to be really biased politically, and I'm no different, of course. And if you know my channel, if you pay attention at all, I am a registered Republican. I've been since I was 18, so I've been a Republican for a very long time. I think 25 years now. I've been voting Republican. So without that being said, there's no Democrats in my top 10. Of course, most of them aren't Republicans or Democrats. They are, Federalists or Democrat Republicans, some of them. But there are some Republicans on the list as well. And I didn't put any very recent presidents on my list. Obviously, it's always hard to, again, take in presidents that are pretty recent because it's going to take a while to evaluate their presidential, what happened with them while they're president and all that. So no Donald Trump on the list. So I was like, I don't want to put him on the list. That'd be very controversial. Obviously, people would not be very happy. My most recent president I did put on the list was president when I was a little kid. So there's only one president on here that was president when I was alive, but that was 40 years ago almost, or 35 to 40 years ago. So still, hopefully, long enough time. Anyways. So hopefully not too controversial to put on the list. Anyways, saying that, I will go with my 10 favorite presidents to study. Number 10, I have John Quincy Adams here. Number 10 might be a little bit surprising. I don't think John Quincy Adams is talked about a lot when you talk about the great presidents of history and ones that are studied as much. But I find him a very fascinating individual. A lot of things here. I mean, obviously, he's the son of John Adams, the second president of the United States, and the first time we've had a father-son president. We'll have another one with George Bush and George W. Bush. So we've had that twice in the history. And we've had, I think, cousins with Franklin Roosevelt and Theodore Roosevelt. And we also had grandfather and grandson with William Henry Harrison, I believe, and Benjamin Harrison. So we've had a couple of family connections through history, interesting enough. But talking about John Quincy Adams, so here's a guy, he grew up as a kid when the country first was established, and saw his father, and also traveled a lot with his father to other countries as John Adams was going around and kind of being an ambassador to places like France and England, and I think Holland and stuff like that. So he got to travel quite a bit with his father, because he was the oldest of the John Adams kids. And he was even, I believe, was educated, had to go to school in these other countries like Paris, France, or something like that. And so he had a very interesting upbringing and education through that. And through that, I know he ended up being able to speak several different languages. So he was multilingual and all that, and very smart guy, of course. Obviously, coming from President John Adams, who was also a very smart guy. And in fact, I've seen some videos of historians who have said that John Quincy Adams is the smartest president we've ever had. So I thought that was pretty fascinating, because you don't really talk. We don't talk a lot about John Quincy Adams necessarily of his presidency, because his presidency isn't one of the great presidencies, ones that we talk about as much, I guess. So mostly I like studying John Quincy Adams for the things he did before and after being president. I think they're very unique, and we've never seen before or after it, really, to say the truth. But yeah, so that's, I think, is interesting in itself, just to say if he's not, it's hard to say who's the smartest. That's very opinionated, but the fact that I've heard historians say that he's the smartest president we've had, I think makes him very interesting. I think part of that is, again, multilingual, educated all over. Of course, he went to law school and became a lawyer, though he didn't spend a lot of time, I think, doing law. He got into politics at a fairly young age, following in his dad's footsteps. Ended up being an ambassador, I believe, to Russia for a little while. Also, his wife, he got married to, I think it's from England. And so his first time a president married, has the first lady that was not American born, which is kind of interesting. I don't know how many we've had since then. I know Melania Trump is not American born, so I don't know if that's the only other one that we've had on top of my head. But anyway, it was ambassador to Russia for a little bit. Eventually got up to being Secretary of State under James Monroe, who was the, I believe, fifth president of the United States. And by many counts, is considered one of the greatest Secretary of States we've ever had, also in our history. Worked very well. 8 years under James Monroe, I believe, as Secretary of State. Was very vital in the Monroe Doctrine that we protect, I believe, South America from foreign invaders and all that. So big on all that anyway. So he's Secretary of State for 8 years, then ran for president, had one of the craziest elections of all time as I believe, Democrat Republican, running against like Andrew Jackson and a couple other individuals. And they believe there was a bad deal under the table where he had somebody get his supporters to vote for him over Andrew Jackson, and in return he named that guy part of his cabinet. So Uh, I don't think it was a dirty deal, but it was, the optics looked bad. So that kind of bit of a shadow on his presidency. Again, he's president for only 4 years. On re-election, he lost to Andrew Jackson, who was pretty upset over the first election, everything that happened, and kind of was getting revenge on that. Anyways, but what's interesting about John Quincy Adams is he didn't disappear like most presidents just disappear. You don't really hear much about him. No, this guy goes back and becomes a congressman. The only time I believe that's ever happened in the history of the United States, that a former president went back into politics like that and became a congressperson and did that for a very long time. Worked very hard and all that. It was very vital in the abolition movement. If you watch the movie that's not right, Amistad. If you watch the movie Amistad, he was a lawyer who represented some slaves that were on a ship that came to the United States after they kind of rebelled against the crew, and he defended them anyway. So very strong abolitionist. And the guy died in the Capitol. He was working in the U.S. Capitol and died there. I mean, that's how he worked until he died. It's very crazy anyway. So for all of that, that's why I put John Quincy Adams number 10. I just think he's a very fascinating individual. Number 9, I have Ike Eisenhower. Of course, I have to have Eisenhower on the list. As a Kansan, proud Kansan, Eisenhower is the only president that is from Kansas. So I find him very fascinating in that sense overall. In fact, I've been to his, in Abilene, Kansas, his Presidential Library Museum and his child homes there as well. I've been there twice, and I was there maybe a year or two ago. I was there again anyway. It's a really cool museum overall, and definitely find him very fascinating. Of course, was in the military, went to West Point, and then was a lifelong kind of military guy. Almost went to World War I, but the war ended before he ever was deployed there, so he never fought there. But he rose himself, of course, to general, which was mostly political, but he was good enough to go up the ranks politically to get to the general spot. He did a lot of traveling in Europe and other countries, which made him very vital during World War II because he knew the layout of Europe very well during that point. But after he lived in all kinds of countries during the time working for the military. And it was one of those things when World War II came around. Of course, his biggest claim to fame is that he was the commander of the Allied forces. It wasn't necessarily that he was the greatest general ever, greatest battle tactician, whatever, but he was a good logistics guy. He knew how, he was very good at moving, coming up with plans on how to move the military and where to go and all that. So he's a great planner. I think he was maybe one of those planners we ever had. And of course, the movie just came out about Eisenhower planning D-Day. You know what a big moment that was in World War II history. And so that was his big contribution, I think, is just having to plan all these where the battles and where to attack and how to move the military, because that was a big deal at the time, to move the whole military from across the ocean from the United States to of course Normandy in France and other places, and to deploy them and deploy tanks. And it was a large scale attack that we've never seen before in our history. And of course, we're successful enough to win that war. And so he became a hero, one of the biggest American heroes we ever had. And I guess that's partly why I like putting him on this list, because of World War II is the bloodiest, biggest war we've ever been a part of. And of course, we're fighting Hitler and nuclear war and all. It was very vast and important that we won that, and he was a big part of that. So he came back a hero, huge parades. If you go to the museum, you'll see like all these. I mean, he was so popular. Nobody more popular than Eisenhower when he came back for that. And he wasn't necessarily a big political guy. And in fact, nobody knew if he was Republican or Democrat. And he was actually friends with Truman, who was president. And Truman tried to recruit him to be the Democrat presidential nominee. Of course, Republicans are trying to get him to run for Republican, because everybody knew if he ran, he would win. It's like, you're not going to beat Eisenhower. He's a hero. So it was very vital once he decided to become a Republican. and ran for the Republican side. And he, again, that wasn't his big goal or dream, is to be president or anything. It's just like one of those opportunities that, but he was a good leader, obviously, and he had this opportunity to take the highest office in the United States, and he took it, and yeah, he won easily, hands down, no competition. He won the presidency, and then of course won a re-election pretty easily as well, and president for 8 years. You might say his presidential isn't as exciting as maybe what he did before, but one of the big things is the highway system, I know, and that's because after World War I, he actually traveled across the United States with a convoy, and it took, a month, to go across the United States because there was no highway system. And so it's interesting to look at that and see how it affected when he was president. He's like, yeah, we need a highway system so we can travel across the United States at a much faster, efficient pace anyway. So I think that was one of his big contributions, amongst other things. Anyways, so what more I can say is I'm a fan, of course, being from Kansas, of Ike Eisenhower. So I put him on this list as well. Before I move on, I do have 2 books that I bought at the Eisenhower Museum of Eisenhower. This is Eisenhower, The White House Years by Jim Newton. And I have Crusading Europe, a personal account of World War II. Anyway, so 2 books I'm reading from that anyways. All right, number 8. I have another wartime hero, kind of goes hand in hand here. I have Ulysses S. Grant here, number 8 on the list. And again, this is, I think, a very interesting individual. Another one who went to West Point and all this, and rose to the ranks of the military. And he's not talked about as much in his presidential. In fact, for a long time, he was talked about as maybe one of the worst presidents, because he did give jobs, I think, to friends maybe that weren't supposed to be and shouldn't have, maybe more corrupt and shouldn't have been there. And there's been a lot of talks of him being like maybe a drunk, or he gambled or whatever. But I think recently history has kind of turned and made him look a little more positive overall. But again, this is one of those things where he was vital to one of the most important periods of our history, which was the Civil War, the most divisive time in our country, and a time where our country could have really fell apart and needed really good leadership, and was having some really bad leadership up to till we got to Abraham Lincoln, of course, and that turned everything around. We had the war, and of course Grant, he was in the army before, fought in the French. I don't know what war it was. There was a war that happened before this that he was a part of, and he even fought with Jefferson Davis and I forget in the big time General Lee, whatever. So it's interesting that he fought under those guys who would go on to be, kind of fighting for the Confederate side during this time period. He wasn't the general at the beginning of the Civil War. It took through many generals who failed, who were in charge of the Union Army, basically. And Ulysses Grant was doing such a good job in the area that he was in charge of during the time. And finally, Lincoln finally got to putting Grant in charge, and that's when the Union really surged ahead and won the war, which was great because it obviously ended slavery and also it united the country back together. And yeah, Grant's leadership during that time was very vital, of course. So that's mostly why I have him here. It's because of his leadership during the most tumultuous time in our history. That his leadership really helped, and his ideas on how to fight the war and his battle strategy and all that, we really needed, because nobody else was doing a good job until he got in there. And then he kind of was able to come up with a winning formula, I guess, to finally end the war and unite the country anyway. So I put him there. And then, of course, again, kind of like Eisenhower, he was an American hero. He easily won the presidency afterwards and won re-election as well. So 8 years as president. As president, I don't know if I know as much about. He's somebody I need to study more about. In fact, I'll go get my book I have of his I'm reading. This is a Grant by Ron Chernow, big biography that he wrote. Ron Chernow is one of my favorite authors when it comes to presidential history. Anyway, so I started on this. I have a long ways to go. I haven't gone too far in the book. As you can see, it is a massive book, like 1,000 pages. It's one of the longest biographies I've ever seen. But I think this is definitely one of those books that have definitely helped change the way we look at Ulysses S. Grant anyways. So at some point I'll try to get more into this book. As I said, I have so many books I'm reading. So, but yeah, so for that, I put him at number 8. Number 7, I have James Madison. I put in here because of his huge huge what he did for, of course, one of the founding fathers. He was the 4th president of the United States, so very early in history, and was there kind of from the beginning, of course, and is the father of the Constitution, which is our most important document, along with the Declaration of Independence, you can say, that shapes our country. And what we really founded our country on is that Constitution, mainly the Bill of Rights. The first 10 are very important. And he was very vital in all of that. And to be honest, to me, the Constitution is the most important document in the history of the world, because nobody else has a document like the Constitution, in my opinion. And that's why America, I think, is so great. It's because of the Constitution put together by many, but the one we contribute to is James Madison. Another guy who's super smart. This guy was, to me, one of the smartest presidents we've ever had. And he was there during the whole Constitution ratifying, and he was kind of the one who took notes, and so we know a lot about what happened through his notes, I believe, during that time period. I don't know if I know he was Secretary of State under Thomas Jefferson during his presidency, and I remember even during George Washington. So I remember reading George Washington even asked him to like fit in for Secretary of State because Thomas Jefferson quit as Secretary of State during Washington's tenure, and so he's trying to find somebody to take Thomas Jefferson's place, which was very hard. Thomas Jefferson was very good and a very smart guy, and I remember he really wanted James Madison to take that spot, but I don't think James Madison could or didn't or whatever at that time. But eventually he'd become Secretary of State for 8 years under Thomas Jefferson. I believe he was very vital during the whole, the St. Louis Purchase and all that. Louisiana Purchase, sorry. The Louisiana Purchase, I think he was pretty vital in all that under Thomas Jefferson. Anyways, and like I said, just a super smart guy. He's known to be the shortest president, super short guy. Seems like I think he's pretty quiet too, but his wife, Dolly Madison, we've seen that name many times. It's been used. Probably one of the greatest hosts we've had in the White House. But yeah, during his presidency, again, people don't talk about as much. Again, his most, why I had to put him in here is because, I mean, like I said, the Constitution is so huge in our history and his contribution to that. So I put him on here just because he needs to be talked about because of that. And the biggest thing during his presidency is probably the War of 1812 happened during that time period, which is a very interesting war because England, we're having fights with England again. And it didn't come out at the end that we were super victorious, except that we were able to, England, wasn't able to take us out and had to leave, and we had to, finally get some kind of a compromise in there. So it seemed like a war that was almost like a neutral war, like nobody really won. We decided, okay, nobody's going to get ahead of this. Let's just quit now and make some kind of peace. Anyways, but after 1812, the United States kind of proved through that we were one of the strongest countries in the world, or maybe the strongest country in the world, and one to be reckoned with, because we're still early in our history at that time. And so we can look at that. Anyway, so yeah, I don't have much more to say. I haven't read a biography on him, so I'll have to get one at some point. But that's James Madison, number 7. Number 6, I got John Adams here. Obviously, he has to be talked about. He was vital in the beginning of, I keep using that word vital. That's the best word I can think of. In the beginning of our country. Of course, was part of the first kind of Congress that was, declaring war against England. He was very for that. Very good orator. He was a lawyer, very smart guy, and was very vital during founding father during that whole time. He became a very important ambassador, like I said. I talked about John Quincy Adams already, to England and to France and to, I think, Holland, and getting their help during the war process and all that. And then, of course, was important enough to be the first vice president of the United States. So very huge position to be in, and the first one to do it. And the second president of the United States. So, I mean, two pretty huge moments, and helped shape the country, of course. So obviously, I'm going to put founding fathers pretty high on my list because they helped shape the country the way it is. And John Adams is definitely one of those guys. He had to be on there. His presidency wasn't that big. In fact, he had some moments that weren't so good. And he was only in there for 4 years before he lost to Thomas Jefferson. So it wasn't one of the most popular presidents we ever had. But still, for all his contributions before the war, you have to put him down as one to study. And there's been a lot of stuff on John Adams to study. I know there's a big biography I haven't read of his. Again, that's like 1,000 pages that I have to get at some point. But I do have the John Adams HBO series on Blu-ray that I've watched a couple times. Great TV series made for, what do you call it? Great series that came out a while ago, starring Paul Giamatti as John Adams. Won a bunch of Emmys for it, but yeah, great stuff there anyways. Number 5, I have Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. Definitely one of the most popular presidents we've had in our history and one of the most well-known. He's one of our Mount Rushmore presidents. Obviously, you don't get on Mount Rushmore for no reason. He was, again, so popular at the time they did Mount Rushmore. That's how he got on there. He was only one that's not really one of the founding fathers. Came later in the early 1900s era, during a very, I would say during a very prosperous time in the United States. And again, I haven't studied enough on him to talk about all the things he did, but I know he made a lot of changes when he got into the White House. He's also just an interesting character overall. I think when you look at what he did with the Rough Riders and as a military guy, and then I think he was like Secretary of the Navy, who then kind of helped us get into World War I, or not World War I, sorry, the Spanish-American War. Sorry, I'm trying to think of my history on the top of my head. Spanish-American War, and then they put him as vice president thinking that that's the job that he can't hurt us with, because even the Republicans were not sure about this guy. And then McKinley ended up getting assassinated, and he got into the presidency and was actually the youngest president we ever had. I think he was 44 years old. He wasn't elected, so he's not the youngest elected president, but he's the youngest president that we've had. It was at that time, which I'm 43, so I'm almost as old as Teddy Roosevelt was when he became president, which is kind of crazy to think about. Great speaker. Like I said, very popular president. I know they made a lot of changes in the White House, and he had a big family. And photography, I don't know if there's a lot of photography at that time, but it feels like he was like the first president that really had a lot of pictures of him and his family doing things at the White House. Like I said, made a lot of changes, additions to the White House that wasn't done a lot at that time. And just a lot of policies. He was big, putting a lot of policies out there. Again, I can't speak too much on that. I haven't read enough on him to speak about everything, but I know he developed the national parks. It was one of the big things. I know he looked at, I think, certain practices maybe with meat or something like that, and changed what we did with that. I can't get into it because I just not as knowledgeable on that part of it. But yeah, anyways, I know he was very much out there speaking and changing policies and stuff like that, and that's why he's so much well liked by the audience. I mean, he won his reelection. He was reelected and won easily during that time period. And then even when and again, at this time, he could have been reelected again, but it was usual for only run twice for president and then leave it to the next person, not be president forever. That was just kind of the unwritten rule, I guess, of it. And so he gave it to William Taft, whatever, his Secretary of Treasury or something, I can't remember, to be the next president. And he took over. He didn't like what Taft was doing, so he ran against Taft, who's the Republican president, but he ran under the Bull Moose Party and tried to become president again and almost did it. That's what I think is very fascinating about Teddy Roosevelt is that's how popular he was. And Taft wasn't a super popular president, but he was so popular that he even beat William Taft in the election. It's like the only time a third party has beaten one of the major two parties in an election, I think, in history. And unfortunately, he lost to Woodrow Wilson, the Democrat, who then became president at that time. And maybe, I don't know, who knows what happened if he never even meddled, if Taft could have won that, who knows. But yeah, he was so good that he was able to beat Taft in the election, which is just crazy to think about nowadays. And there's all kinds of crazy stories of him like getting shot and surviving and then finishing his speech that he was giving at the time. And I think he even says, "I've been shot," like, or something like that, before he continued on in his speech. Unfortunately, he had something in his chest that it stopped the bullet, so he didn't get wounded mortally and all this. Anyways, yeah, I wish I could talk more about Teddy Roosevelt. I just know he's just one of the most fascinating guys that we've had in the presidential and thought very highly of. Like I said, many put him pretty high on a list. So, number 4, I have Ronald Reagan. This might be a little different. This is the most recent president I have on my list. President during 1980, 88. I was born in 83, so I was just a little kid when he was president. Don't remember much about him as a kid. Didn't know anything about it. But of course, my parents were big Reagan fans, and my dad would probably say Reagan's his favorite president of all time. And 80s was a very, uplifting period, the Reagan era. I think a lot of people were pretty positive about Ronald Reagan. Again, and I have a biography that I read of him that's somewhere. And what makes him, of course, the big thing is the whole Cold War. That was a big deal at the time. Very scared of Russia and the nuclear weapons they had. And of course, they still had the Berlin Wall up in East-West Germany. So a lot of things going there, which was ran by Russia at the time. It was our biggest competitor. And of course, communism, it was evil, still is, but we're really against that. But there's always a fear of getting into a nuclear war with Russia, which would end everybody's lives and all that. And it had been going on for a while. Reagan, though, again, this is my biasness as a Republican. He definitely shaped the Republican Party for a long time, but which you still feel today, which is the idea of smaller government. We want a small government and more states' rights, and we want less taxes, and we want to cut taxes and all that. And that the idea is that if we give the power and the money to the people and the government just get off our backs, we're better as a country, we're better as people. And so I think that really resonated with a lot of people of the time period, especially people that were Republicans. And he was extremely popular. I mean, he's definitely, we talk about one of the most popular presidents in the United States. He's definitely there. One of the great speakers, of course, great sense of humor, but also stood very strong and firm in his beliefs. And of course, pretty interesting history, as he was an actor during like the 40s or whatever. He was a professional actor for most of his life, and then got into politics through being president of the SAG, and then ended up going to in California, becoming the governor of California, I think, for maybe 8 years before running for president. And it was during that 8 years as the California governor that his ideas really become popular amongst the conservatives. He kind of really, to me, is like the father of the conservative movement that we have still today. And then when he ran for president, against Jimmy Carter, and the country was in turmoil. I mean, our economy was horrible. We had problems with gas shortages, and it was a terrible time when Jimmy Carter was president. And so when Reagan came in, it was like, we need to change. We need to do all this. We need to help the economy and all this. People were ready for a change at that time, and so he beat Jimmy Carter pretty easily. And then he ran for re-election, and he won 49 of the 50 states. I mean, one of the biggest landslides in election history. The only state he didn't get was Minnesota, but he got all the 49. Yeah, so incredibly popular, and his ideas were incredibly popular. And again, 80s was a very good decade because of that, I think, of the Reaganomics and all that. And then maybe one of the most important moments is his, tear down that wall speech, that eventually had the consequences of the wall finally getting torn down in the next administration, George Bush's administration. Anyway, but he was very vital in that, like being very strong against Gorbachev and against Russia, and not backing down, and making sure the United States was the most powerful country in the world to face off against Russia. And Russia couldn't compete against us, didn't have the resources, and so that kind of helped somewhat of decline of the Russian power. Anyway, so for what he did with the contributions to the Cold War, I still think he belongs here, and that's why I'm at number 4. Number 3, I'm going with Thomas Jefferson, a very controversial figure, actually. And I've heard a lot of people, even more conservative people, not like Thomas Jefferson. I'm sure more liberal-minded people probably don't like Thomas Jefferson. Again, a little divisive, but yet you can't deny the contributions he made to this country. Obviously, as I've said, he wrote the most important document in our history, the Declaration of Independence, which we celebrate today on July 4th, from 1776. It created this great country that I get to be a part of. And a lot of ideas came from him that we made us, I think, a different country than what was ever there. And definitely, helped us go away from the monarchy system to a democratic system and all that. He's another guy as I said, John Quincy Adams, I've heard him say that he's the smartest president we've had. I mean, I would think Thomas Jefferson is. I mean, he was an incredibly smart guy. And I've visited his house in Monticello, one of the coolest things I've ever done in Virginia. My favorite place I've ever visited, to be honest, as far as presidential history. It's such a cool house. He designed it. What makes him so interesting is, like, not only was he one of our biggest presidents, again, he's on Mount Rushmore presidents. He was obviously a very successful writer, orator or whatever, governor, inventor. He invented some things like the swivel chair. Like, I get to swivel in this chair, and that was invented by Thomas Jefferson, which people might not know. So he invented some pretty cool things like the swivel chair. If you go to his house, you'll see he invented this system where he can write a letter, and he has it hooked up to these other pens, and so he can write the same letter 3 different pieces of paper, so he doesn't have to copy the same. If he wrote it just on one and had to get it copied, he kind of had a system where he can write the letter 3 times basically at the same time, so he can distribute all 3 letters to wherever he needed to go. So that was pretty cool. He also had a what do you call it? He had a horse and buggy, but he invented a thing that he put on the horse and buggy that would count how many miles his horse and buggy went. Odometer. I don't know that he invented the odometer, but he might have. It was the first probably odometers ever invented, way before cars were a thing. He was able to kind of do that on a horse and buggy. I thought that was very fascinating. He had an incredible library. He was an incredible reader, and that was a big deal to him, which I love because I love to read too. And so, man, he read a lot. So incredibly smart guy in all kinds of different aspects, science, and philosophy and all this. Anyways, incredibly knowledgeable and all that, like I said. And also he designed Monticello, so he even did architecture. I mean, the guy just did everything, which I just find very fascinating. All the different things he was really good at. I wish I was good at one thing, let alone all the stuff he was good at. Yeah, of course, he's the very first Secretary of State. He was president for 8 years, very popular, won both elections very easily, really no competition, not much. I mean, John Adams maybe at the first one, but the second one, there was no competition. He won that hands down. He was president. Maybe the biggest thing that happened during presidency was the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the size of the United States. So that was a big moment in history. And the fact that he had the I don't know, wisdom, had the leadership to say, let's go ahead with the deal and not talk to Congress. Like it would, usually you'd have to talk to Congress and do the whole thing, and that would take a long time, but he knew we need this really bad. And he had the foreknowledge to do that, which was, I think, a great thing that he did. That may be the biggest thing he did anyways, but overall, yeah, of course, the controversy is going to be that he owned slaves. That's definitely an unfortunate part of our history. But I guess I take all that out and just say the immense contributions to the beginning of the country, and just individually, I just found so fascinating all the different things he did, invented, and all that. Anyway, so yeah, Thomas Jefferson here at number 3. Obviously, my top two, the top two everybody has. It depends on which one you like. These both, my top two could be number 1. It's hard to say one's 1, one's 2. They both are the most important presidents I think we ever had. But at number 2, I put George Washington here. And like I said, he's often number 1 on the list, and he definitely deserves to be number 1 as well. Obviously, very first president of the United States. He had to shape what the president was because we never had a president before. So he had to create a lot of things as what the president should be and all that anyway. So a lot of what the president is today is what we took from George Washington's leadership and all that, and how to deal with, and just starting a country. I have to imagine it's pretty hard from scratch to be like, all right, we're going to make a brand new country. It's going to be different. And of course, I think we look at one of the biggest contributions is the fact that he kind of said we should not have a monarch. We should not have somebody that's president for life. He was president for 2 terms, 8 years, and then he said, okay, I'm done. We need to move on to a different person. Anyways, and if he wanted to run again, he would have won easily. He could have been president, as long as he was alive. He was so popular, obviously. But I think that was great leadership skills or great, I don't know what you want to say, one of the most important things that was done is the peaceful transfer of power is something we don't see a lot in history and through a lot of countries even today. Peaceful transfer of power is a very big part of our country, and I think we think a lot of that to George Washington, who was very vital in that. Even before that, I mean, obviously he was the commander of the American forces during the American Revolutionary War, which we were able to win and gain our independence. So obviously we can never measure how much George Washington contributed to the country through what he did there, and came up with a great strategy to be able to win a war against a country that was way bigger than us, way more powerful than us, and yet somehow we were able to win that war and able to get our independence. So thank a lot to George Washington for that. It's really his leadership skills. He was just one of the greatest leaders ever. Definitely probably the greatest leader we've ever had in that aspect. And he was the one that we needed, to be able to do, and we wouldn't be the country we are today without him, I would say. Again, because of all that, he was super popular, won unanimously twice, the only president to ever win unanimously, where he had no competition. Nobody could even touch him at that part because of how popular he was after winning the war and all that. But yeah, I don't know much more to say except he was just a larger-than-life character that we still look at today. And one of the big contributions, I think, is his farewell speech and his letter to the country, I think, after that, and how we should, conduct ourselves and all that anyway. So, yeah, huge figure in our history, obviously. He has to be in the top 2. If he's not in the top 2, Like, what are you doing? Like, I can't take you seriously. All right, so obviously number one is the one that we all know. Number one is, and it's Abraham Lincoln. Always my number one, just a slight above George Washington, but it's hard to say. Those two are so vital, and two presidents I've studied the most on probably is those two. I read Ron Chernow's his biography on Washington is fantastic. Definitely one of the best biographies I've ever read. Yeah, and I've read a couple other things about him, watched documentaries. There's a movie out right now called Young Washington I haven't seen yet. But anyways, but I put Abraham Lincoln in here at number one because he was president during the, again, like I said before, the most divisive time in our history, even more divisive than now. We were killing each other in this country over the Civil War. And obviously one of the biggest slavery, getting to end slavery is maybe the biggest, if not the biggest, one of the biggest moments in our history. One of the best things we've done in our country is be able to get rid of slavery, that system. And it was during Lincoln's presidency, and it was, again, our country could have fell apart. We were so at war. We were two different countries, the Union and the Confederacy, the South. If the Union didn't win that war, we wouldn't be the United States that we are today, because we'd be split into two different parts, and the United Confederacy States would have been its own country. And I can't imagine a United States where that happens. I think Lincoln was so right to fight that war and to be able to unite the country, because he knew we would be stronger as a united country than be divided like the way that they were. And some would have maybe been okay with us being divided and said, let's just let the Confederacy, leave. We don't need them and all that. But I think his leadership skills and his foreknowledge again was right on to fight that war, defeat the Confederacy, so then they come back into the United States, end slavery for good. All that was very important. And he was is one of those moments where we had some bad leadership up to Abraham Lincoln. I mean, the worst presidents of the United States were the ones right before Lincoln. And slavery was a huge issue during that whole time period. And Lincoln was the right leader at the right time that we needed. If we had the wrong leader, I mean, again, I said this country wouldn't be the same. So that's why I put him number one, how vital that period was and what Lincoln did. And again, we've had lots of stuff on Lincoln. I've read a biography on him. It's really good. We had a movie, Lincoln, of course, by Spielberg, that won a bunch of Oscars. And he's definitely a president we talk about the most, and one of them, definitely, along with Washington, that we study and I've studied. And his image, I mean, you just know his image so well. He was, I think, the tallest president we ever had. If I remember right, he's like 6'4", but that beard, the tallness, the hat, and just his the speeches. I mean, the Gettysburg Address. Everybody knows that from a child. As an American, from child, you hear that as a young kid, and it's ingrained in you. Four scores and 7 years ago, that whole speech, the Gettysburg Address, is such one of the most important speeches ever made. And of course, and then, being able to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, ending slavery, one of the biggest moments in our history for positive reasons. Ending slavery was a big deal and something that needed to happen. And we needed someone like Lincoln's leadership skills to finally make that happen. And you see that in the Lincoln movie. That movie really shows his leadership and what he did there. And he's one of the best orators we ever had, one of the best debaters we ever had. Just everything about him. And then it ends with one of the most tragic moments in our history too, Lincoln being assassinated by. I mean, it's crazy. He did so much for our country, and then he ends in an assassination for all his hard work that he did. And he worked very hard during that time period. Didn't take any time off, obviously, and was everything was ingrained in winning that war to preserve the Union. And his life was ended because of it. For all his good work, what does he get? A bullet in the head, just very tragic. Anyway, so that kind of also helps, his legendary status, I think, as a president and leader in our country. Because who knows, you think, what could have happened if he would have stayed president, for another election, another 4 years, what he could have done for the Reconstruction. He would have been so much better than what we did get with Andrews, I believe it was. And that's where Ulysses Grant, again, was pretty vital in the Reconstruction of the United States, which was a very, very important part of our history. Anyways, I guess I can throw that on the Ulysses Grant one. But anyways, what more can you say? Abraham Lincoln, an absolute legend, and is my favorite president of the United States. Anyway, so that's my top 10. There's other guys I could have put in there, but I don't know. I just kind of went on those 10 because I think they're just very fascinating individuals who have run this country and helped make it so great. Anyway, so yeah, I know some of you might not be from the United States, so I don't know what you think about this list of anyways. And yeah, I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts and their favorite president and their thoughts on this list. And so besides that, happy anniversary, America. So happy to be here and to be in this country where we are free to make our choices. Again, the Constitution, the First Amendment, freedom of speech is one of the biggest, is the most important thing about our country, is our freedom. And I cherish that so much as an American. Anyways, I'm very proud to be American and to talk to you on this day, 250th anniversary. And so I hope everybody else has a great July 4th, rest of the day anyways, and keep safe out there. And hopefully you like this video. And I just thank anybody watching it, and thank you for any comments you put in there, and just thank you to all my subscribers for supporting this channel. I appreciate you all. I hope you have a great day.